Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I am sharing a birthday card I made for Spellbinders Birthday blog hop. It's Spellbinders birthday this month, and if you hadn't found out already, there is a free die with purchase while supplies last. I have a video that I'll link to the end of this one entailing that, showing you a couple card ideas using that particular die. Now for this birthday card, I'm going to be using the Yana's Tulips and Daffodils press plate and also the coordinating stencil set. I'm pairing it along with the Hummingbird Garden embossing folder and stencil set. This actually releases tomorrow on the 24th, but there is early access for club members. I'm hot foiling the Tulips and Daffodils press plate on my Glimmer system using some Prism foil on Hammermill Cardstock. Once I have the stacking on my machine, I press the timer button, and once that timer button stops flashing, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine for that pressure. You need the heat and the pressure for the hot foiling. Once I foiled that image, I put my solid hot foil plate on my Glimmer system and solid hot foil the remaining foil. I'm not actually going to use it on this project. Sometimes I'll use those pieces for mats on my cards. Sometimes I'll use them in place of specialty cardstocks because they make some really nice cardstocks for die cutting and using with different die cuts, and other times I use them as is. Just depends on the image. For this one here, I'm just going to tuck it to the side. I will use it in a future project, probably for die cutting those pieces, but I am going to use this extra little tiny bit of foil on the end to foil on some Hammermill cardstock to die cut my happy birthday sentiment. I'm using the happy birthday die set, so we have an upper layer as well as a shadow layer, and I'm going to be using this foiled cardstock for the upper layer. And the stacking when doing solid hot foiling is exactly the same as regular hot foiling. We're just replacing the regular press plate or foil plate with the solid hot foil plate. So once that's done, I can set my machine aside to cool down. I can die cut my happy birthday sentiment on that foiled piece. And then I am die cutting the Hummingbird silhouette from the Hummingbird Garden emboss and stencil set to use in just a moment for embossing that detail. So this embossing folder is a nice large one. It's 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And I have a video that is going to be coming out with that showing a couple different ways to use this, as well as the other embossing folder and stencil set in that collection. So you have the embossing folder, the stencil set to color them, but you also have 2 dies for those hummingbirds so that you can do them as separate embellishments. And that's what I'm doing for this card. For my foiled Tulips and Daffodils background, I'm using the coordinating stencil set with some Cloud9 matte blending inks. These are similar to Distress Oxide inks in the fact that they have a chalky matte finish to them, and I thought it would be a really nice contrast to the foiled lines of this image. The other reason I wanted to use the matte blending inks is because I'm going to be using some interference inks on my Hummingbird, and that's going to add a really bright shimmer to it. So I wanted the contrast of some muted florals in the background and then the bright shimmery color on that Hummingbird. So the first color I used there was Marigold Bloom, and then I added some Pimpernel Rose, and I'm using some Lisa Horton 1-inch brushes for blending those 2 colors together. They're nice and soft, they have a flat edge to them, and they're great for getting really soft, subtle looks. You can easily add more layers to deepen that color, but I wanted to have just a soft look for this background with that beautiful foiled edge. I'm using those same 2 colors for this next layer here. I'm doing my daffodils in the combination of the Marigold Bloom and Pimpernel Rose. I typically don't do a lot of oranges and yellows when I'm creating, but obviously they're perfect for daffodils. I've used this set a couple times for a couple different videos when they were released, using them in a couple different ways with different colors. I used some pinks and purples with them and absolutely love that. Now for my tulip, I'm going to use some cottage powder, which is this beautiful blue, and then I'm going to use some stand-in lilac. Now what I forget to do here is mask off that petal from my daffodil, so you can see that I get a little bit of purple on there, but my Hummingbird is going to go right in front of that, so we don't actually see it in the final product. If you're using this set on its own without something in front of it, definitely use some scrap paper to mask off the different areas. They're just too close to each other, so it's really hard to not get your brushes in there if you don't mask it off with some scrap paper. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. I typically save pieces of printer paper that have things that I don't necessarily need to keep anymore or whatever, and just use the opposite side of that. That works absolutely perfect for this. So then we use the next layer of stencils. I'm going to use those same cottage powder and stand-in lilac for my tulips here. This time I remember to use that scrap paper to mask that area off so that we don't get colors where we don't want them. So I chose to do some blue and purple tulips here. You could easily use some pinks as well. I think that would be absolutely beautiful. Again, I chose some colors that I thought were going to be muted, as well as show off the colors of my hummingbird in front of it a little bit nicer. I didn't want to use the same colors for my hummingbird as I was using for my flowers. So we have another layer here for the daffodils, again using that Marigold Bloom and Pimpernel Rose. Now that Pimpernel Rose is more of a corally color than an orange color, but I really love it with that Marigold Bloom. I think it's just really pretty. And I love the contrast of the matte finish with the matte blending inks and that beautiful shine from that prism foil. I always love prism as well as aurafoil because it has that holographic look to it, and it goes with many different colors because it shows a bunch of different colors on it. For my greenery here, I'm using some Jasmine Sage as well as Willow Forest, just 2 different shades of green. Typically when I'm doing my inking for leaves, I'll make my leaves a little bit heavier or darker towards the bottom or the base of them, a little bit lighter towards the top. I ended up having a ton of ink still left on my brush from my previous projects, so I ended up having a little bit more ink on that first layer than I really intended. Always a good idea to just take some ink off of your brushes on some scrap paper or a dry cloth before getting too much ink on, because you could always add more ink. You can't take it away from it. And the matte blending inks that I'm using are new colors for the palette. They've got some beautiful muted tones that work really, really well together and look gorgeous. So once I have this last layer of leaves here, we have our background completely done. And once again, because that petal has that purple on it, it's going to be covered with that hummingbird, so we're never going to see that. But you could easily use this as a background all on its own, and you can get really creative and fun with the color choices for these florals. I love press plates that have coordinating stencils. It makes it so easy for coloring them. So with our background done, we can start working on our hummingbird. Now I die cut my hummingbird before embossing it, because if you emboss and then die cut, it's going to flatten that embossed detail, and it's really easy to line up that hummingbird with that embossing folder. To give the hummingbird some beautiful shimmery look to it, like a real hummingbird has, I'm using some Tropical Paradise as well as Summer Garden Interference ink. I put the Tropical Paradise towards the edges and then the Summer Garden on the other edge, just blending them in together. Then I use some Black Soot Distress ink for the beak as well as the feet. Then I take the next stencil set. We're going to just repeat that process. Now, if you've never seen interference inks before, I have a whole playlist dedicated to them. I love using them because I love the shimmer that they give, but they also are like magic ink pads in one. You can see 2 colors on that pad or on that lid. The color on the left is the color that shows up on white or light cardstock. The color on the right is the color that shows up on black or dark cardstock. So you can get some really cool and interesting looks with them. So we have a 3rd layer here for the back wing, once again using those 2 colors here, and our hummingbird is completely done, and it has some gorgeous shimmer to it, just like real hummingbirds do. Now we are ready to add it to the front of our image. So I am going to do my sentiment first. I'm going to layer the different layers to my card first, and then we're going to add it. So I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle to glue that sentiment onto the shadow. I did the shadow in black. I thought that was going to coordinate nicely with the black on the beak as well as the feet of the hummingbird, and then as well as the eye. That's going to be black in a moment as well. Now this is the Prism Solid Hot Foiled cardstock that was die cut for this, and it works beautifully. It die cuts beautifully. You could also use specialty cardstock if you want, or you could use white cardstock and then ink blend one of the colors on top of it to coordinate. I'm just using some tweezers to hold those pieces while I place them down. That way I get some perfect placement with them. Once we have our sentiment done, we can create a mat and trim down our image piece. I'm going to create a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. So my image piece is going to be trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. I'm using a black cardstock, Raven cardstock, for the mat for this, and that is going to be trimmed down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. So we're going to have really narrow edges on here, really narrow mats on here. I wanted to trim down as little of that beautiful image as possible and have those florals as well as the hummingbird have as much space as possible. So we can glue both of these pieces to our A2 card base, and I just use that same liquid glue. I love using liquid glue when card making just because it gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy everything in place. It just helps to make it a little bit easier to line everything up. Once we have those pieces done, we can add our hummingbird to the image. Now, because that hummingbird is embossed, we want to make sure that we get a decent amount of glue on the recessed areas that are going to have good contact with those florals. So I make sure to be fairly liberal with that glue without being excessive. Then we can add the sentiment towards the bottom, and I typically will put that over top of the stems. That's a part of the image that, in my opinion, isn't the most interesting part, so I typically will put that sentiment down there. I use some black enamel accents on the eye as well as the beak to give it some glossy dome dimension. This is very similar to glossy accents, but it's a nice dark black color. I decided I wanted my hummingbird to show up a little bit more on that background. So I opened up my card, put it on my clean sticky mat, and I'm going to line up those stencils again. Grab those scrap pieces of printer paper to make sure that I mask off areas that I don't want to accidentally get ink on. I'm going to use some Galaxy Dream interference ink to darken that green just along the edges. So anywhere there's some green, I'm going to just make it a little bit darker, deepen it a bit more, and we're going to have just a bit more contrast between the hummingbird and the florals in the background. And obviously, because I've already stenciled and because I've already assembled my card, I am being extra careful with each and every layer to make sure that I line up that stencil exactly how it was lined up the first time, and also to make sure that any areas that I don't want to accidentally get ink on is masked off, because we don't want to get this far and then get some ink where we don't want it to go, where that we can't correct. So I'm just using that Galaxy Dream. You could use other colors as well, but I really love the look of this. So this one is kind of a bluey purpley color, but it has a pink interference to it. Now, when we're doing this on light colors, we don't see a ton of the interference when we're just looking at it, but when you tilt it into the light, you can see that shine and you can see that little bit of shimmer on it, and it really enhances it. And I especially love when it comes to hummingbirds, because they have that beautiful sheen to them. I think it is perfect for them. And I definitely love the hummingbird a lot better with that added color to it, because I think it just shows up and it kind of pops off the card a little bit more. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. And if you're looking for more birthday card inspiration, definitely check out the blog hop. You can go to my profile on YouTube here and find my website, and it'll be right on there, as well as everyone else that is participating. It's definitely a great way to get a lot of inspiration for your Spellbinders products. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.